All right, welcome back to another episode of Anyone Have a Pencil? Today I have Hatti Day back for a continuation of our last episode. We got more investor questions, how to get started in real estate, when should I buy property, why should I buy property, timing in my life, how do I avoid losses, all of these things that we want to cover today and provide it to you for free. I've got 20 years of real estate experience. Hatti's got about 10 now. Mm-hmm. So between the two of us, we feel like we can tackle a lot of the questions that you might have, answer some of the concerns that you may have, and we'll get you moving forward.
Yeah.
Hatti, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for today and looking forward to the questions.
I love it.
Yeah.
Where do you want to start?
Yeah, so we kind of left off last week when we got rained out, but it was, we were kind of starting to get into like the property management and how we're managing our assets after we're purchasing them, after, going through all the different ups and downs of the investment side. And so I kind of wanted to dive deep on, the different phases of, risk reward profiles that you have whenever you are investing.
Sure.
And so I think that is what interests me most about you, is because you have so many doors, but everybody starts somewhere. So I kind of want to dive back deep into whenever you first started and then just kind of go through your journey that way. So I have some questions for you on that.
Okay.
And I kind of wanted to get started with just kind of your investor phase. So what are you currently investing for? Like, are you still in that wealth building phase? Are you in the capital preservation phase? Are you in the tax benefit phase? Where are you at?
For me, that's a great question. For me, I'm in all of those phases.
That's good. You can fall into all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, it's funny. My younger sister, she lives in Singapore.
Wow.
And
that's cool.
Her husband's like a big executive for Apple. Mm-hmm. And, they get Apple stock, and stock market's done very well over the last, 10 years. Right. And you can get kind of addicted to the returns that you're getting in the stock market. Mm-hmm. Right. So if let's say you're making 10, even 20% a year in stocks, right? I get this question all the time. Like, why would I invest in real estate? If I'm going to make, $200 a month in cash flow. I think that's where like the common misconception is like the only way to make money is through cash flow.
Yeah.
We can get to this in a minute, but like if I compare the long-term growth of my real estate assets versus like just about any stock in the S&P, mm-hmm. With exception of like new startups like NVIDIA, stuff like that, I feel really competitive.
Yeah.
If not beating most of them.
Absolutely.
So my real estate journey started off originally because I was a W-2 wage earner, right? Then I started my own business, and then my business got very successful. Mm-hmm. And so I had all of this taxable income that I needed to figure out something to do with. Uh-huh. So originally I looked at real estate as like a store of wealth. First of all, store of value, mm-hmm. right? So if you look at, 30-year trend in the real estate market, you're not losing money. Even if you take in, consideration some black swan events, market crashes, 2008, Lehman Brothers gets forced out of the market, COVID, all of these things, right? Mm-hmm. So originally I looked at it as like, I need a tax break. I need a tax deduction. Started getting into that side of things. And when you look at that, so in my tax bracket, I pay, 35%, 40% on my income, claimed income, mm-hmm. right? So I was looking at it, I was like, okay, well, if I'm paying on $100,000, every $100,000 I make, I'm paying $35,000. Okay. That's a huge hit, right? I'm losing 35% of my income. Mm-hmm. So I started buying real estate because you can use a strategy called cost segregation, where if you qualify as a real estate professional, and if you want more information on that, you can reach out to Hatti. But you can accelerate the depreciation on real estate. Plus, you can write off the interest. You can write off maintenance, expenses, closing costs, all sorts of stuff, right? Yeah. But the depreciation is like really the heavy hitter of that. And so by doing that, I would cut my tax liability to and I'm not perfect about this every year, but where I virtually pay $0 in income tax because I own so much real estate.
Wow.
Right. Well, once you're on that roller coaster, you have to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you get addicted to, like, I could cut a check to the US government for $400,000, or I could put that money to work in building and developing my own property, leasing it out, and claiming the cost segregation of that.
Yeah.
So that was my primary motivator for that. And then, through the years, doing that every year, then started buying land, started building property on that and keeping it for myself, or I'll partner with some people and keep it with them. Right. I mean, in no time, I got to, I think I'm at 275, maybe 300 doors now. And I think by the end of next year, I'll probably be closer to like 400,
wow.
which is just insane to think about.
Yeah.
So that was the primary motivator, was avoiding taxes, right?
Yeah.
In a legal way. Because I remember, like, the first couple of years when I had a successful business, I paid taxes. And, I'm 26, 27 years old, like, spending the money, buying, cars and watches and, like, going on vacation and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then the tax man comes knocking and I'm like, oh God, I've got to write a check to the IRS for $200,000. How can I never do that again? Right. So that was number one. But, like, the other things that we were talking about in real estate too, like store of wealth, tax avoidance, or,
mm-hmm.
Reducing your tax bill. But the other thing is, like, building wealth in the first place. I never looked at real estate as something that was going to, like, make me rich every year.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's like something you build over time. So, I mean, even when I was like W-2 or like paying myself from my company, I was always building that thing. I think a lot of people get mixed up in that too, because, you and I talk to investors. Some of our investors now, I'll talk to them on the phone. Like, I'm expecting 25% return this year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they want to get into that get rich quick scheme. That's not a strategy for you.
Definitely not.
So what I would say is, like, anyone that has a W-2 or anyone that's self-employed should own some real estate.
Mm-hmm.
How much you need to own is really up to you and your tax guy and how aggressive you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I never stopped working. It's never stopped grinding. It's just that I built this real estate portfolio because I needed to offset my income, and because I was making enough money where instead of putting it in the stock market or putting it in a 401k, I decided to put it into real estate, something I could control and understand a little bit more, something I can touch tangibly, something I can sell whenever I want, that I get to make the decisions over.
Yeah.
So I really like that control. Does that answer your question a little bit?
No, it does. Absolutely. Because, and it kind of makes me want to ask a few follow-up questions for that, because, whenever you're pushed to establish where you're at in those different phases, and you're absolutely right, you can fall into those different phases all at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that you're kind of open and honest about that, because you can fall into all of those different phases and, kind of while you're building your portfolio. So while you're in wealth building mode, when did you decide that new construction was the best vehicle to invest in real estate wise? Or did you ever invest in pre-owned homes before?
Yes.
Okay. So kind of touch on that and tell us what made your switch.
I mean, there's so many, you can make money like flipping property. There's people that do very good at it.
Yes.
So I don't want to discourage that at all.
Of course not. And there's always a starting point. And I think that that's what I'm most interested in with you is really what was that kind of light switch for you per se, whenever you decided, okay, I'm going to stop, messing with the fix and flips. I'm going to go ahead and just go dive into new construction.
Really, it was doing my first couple of fix and flips.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm okay with like my hands and fixing things and stuff like that, but I'm not a qualified tradesman.
Right.
Every subcontractor that we have that works for us on my development team
mm-hmm.
is 10 times the talented craftsman that I am.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So when I bought my first couple properties, this was in Las Vegas and the market was really good. I renovated property myself and found out it's like an insanely like time intense process, right? Now,
Absolutely.
remember, I'm not doing this full time.
Mhm.
You know, I'm a W-2 income earner, paying myself through a company that I built, right? So I was working 10 hours a day and then trying to figure out doing these flips outside of that.
Ugh.
And one, it took, you know, twice as long as it should have. Some things weren't done right. I had to pay to have them go back and do, like me just being ignorant to it.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people fall in like the romantic side, even in your primary residence, like, let's buy this beautiful, like
fixer upper
1930 Victoria style home and we'll fix it up. And it's like, man, as soon as you knock down one of the walls and you see what's on the inside and the wires are all split and the plumbing's jacked up and the floors are all uneven and like all the things that can go wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the first thing. And I was like, I think I made money on all of those flips. I'm pretty sure I made money on all of those flips, but it was not anywhere. I made way more money in my day job with that same amount of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I was trying to replace, replacing $500,000 a year flipping homes is like, you need a whole team, you need to scale it, and you need to be not the person doing any of the work.
Yeah, so true. Right? So true.
So that was my experience. And then on the new construction side, one, I found that I get a better tax benefit from that because the property is assessed at a higher value. So I get to depreciate more of that. Remember, that's my primary focus, right?
Yes.
I'm trying to offset my income. Two, I was so hands off. Like now I get to be like actually the developer where I'm the guy that looks at a piece of dirt and I say, this is what I want to build here. I get the financing, I write the checks, and I oversee a group of other very talented people that just go and do the work.
Yeah.
Right. So I have trust in them and I get to like kind of sit back and you can manage that in, I don't know, 15, 20 hours a week. So that was my biggest draw to it.
Yeah.
Then long term, I was getting better rents from my clients because it's new construction. Less things broke. My insurance cost was cheaper because I had a brand new roof. I had brand new HVAC. I had brand new plumbing, all of those things. And so I'll never not do new construction again. And I don't want to say never buy an old property and renovate it again, but I guarantee you this, I will never be the person with the tool belt on trying to fix anything ever again. Could
y'all picture that? I mean, I really didn't know that you did any, fix and flips in the beginning. I mean, I kind of figured as much because everyone starts somewhere, but I couldn't imagine you being actually, doing a 10-hour plus day and then going over and trying to, do the electricity that would be crazy. I cannot imagine that.
The other mistake I made too is like, and I think a lot of people kind of fall into this when they first get into real estate. It's like your goal with that property is to flip it for profit and or rent it out to get the highest return on your capital possible, right? Well, when I went into it, I was like putting finishes in the properties that were upgraded, all of those things. Like that was another mistake.
I tend to do the same thing because I like the way things look. I want to showcase it. I want the tenant in place or whoever's purchasing it to be just as happy as I would be. But yeah, it's very costly whenever you do stuff like that. So it's definitely better to not be in that position. I agree with you. Yeah.
And I think too, like you have, especially like my wife, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, like the home that you create for your family, you have a very emotional attachment to.
Absolutely.
And you also have a hard time, and I have a hard time thinking outside of my own perspective sometimes too, right? So I'm looking at this property like, well, I wouldn't like that.
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't live there. Guess what? You're not living there.
So true.
Stop trying to build it to your spec, right? You're in a $200,000 neighborhood flipping a house, and I live in a gated community with like, $2.5 million homes all around me. What am I doing trying to put my taste in a 200,000? Like that makes no sense. So
true.
I screwed that up.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't trust myself to do that, not do that again. I see something now on the real estate side, when I'm just doing the numbers and the budget and everything, I know exactly the numbers I need to hit. I get to remove my emotion, and I get to have other people on my team say, hey, these are your color selections. This is the finishes that we can get to hit the numbers you need to hit. I'll look over it and say, okay, that all makes sense. I think we'll get max rent out of these, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I try not to get involved in, the
emotional
selection process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably one of my favorite phases in my career with you, was actually being the person to pick out all of the selections for the duplexes that y'all have going in Abilene right now.
Yeah.
I think that was really the funnest time period. And then whenever it got put into place and we got to actually see, the walls go up, it was just so cool to see it all come together. So it was cool to be part of that selection process, but I couldn't imagine you being a part of that. Yeah. So it's definitely cool to see how, all the process that goes into that. So that's interesting though. I think that's a good, take to put on it, because I think that people who are doing the fix and flip method are getting lost in that because they're putting so much capital into the property and they're not going to live in it. Yep. So they really should remove the emotion from that.
Well, and also it's like time is the best asset, right? So, I have a family. I don't want to spend that time away from my kids and my wife, and I would rather be doing other things. Now, if I can hit 25% IRR on new construction, that's a no-brainer for me. Oh, yeah. I get to spend half as much time managing my portfolio and my assets than I would if I was going to try to hit 30% and spend, 100 hours a week trying to flip properties. So.
Yeah. And like you said, you want to preserve what you're doing. And so anything that you can do at the lower cost, but it still looks nice, is exactly what you need to be doing.
Totally. And I think too, like just the wisdom that I've gotten over the last 20 years being in this business is really being honest with myself about what I am interested in and capable of doing.
Your strengths.
And my strengths. Yeah. And then the things that I know that I'm not the best at in the room, just like pointing at them and be like, hey, let's like work together on this, let you take the reins. And that's probably made me more money than anything because I'm avoiding self-inflicted wounds.
That's so true. And I want to touch on that here in a little bit more so because a lot of people, whenever they're starting to get into real estate, they really tend, because we're all entrepreneurs, where, whenever the next shiny thing comes out, we kind of tend to go towards that way. But I really want people, whenever they're starting to invest in real estate, to kind of lean in on those strengths. Like you said, you kind of had to go through fixing and flipping to understand those strengths. So if you have to do that to get into real estate and start out there, I say do it. It's a no-brainer, but really lean into your strengths as you're learning and going through those phases and developing so you can, scale and get 400 plus doors.
Absolutely.
Out of it.
And sometimes there's like a market and like a time and place where, I spoke to a lady the other day that called me about some financing on a fix and flip. They've never fixed and flipped a property before, but they were really good friends with the people that lived next door to them. They passed away. Their kids live all over the world, all over the country, right? And their neighbors had told their kids like, hey, if you guys don't want to do anything with this home, sell it to the neighbors at this price. We've already negotiated, blah, blah. So there are certain circumstances where you can't lose unless you just completely go off the reservation. Yeah. But like, okay, well, if I get a $400,000 house in an $800,000 neighborhood, even if I refinish everything with like the nicest upgrades and I'm into it for $600,000, I've got $200,000 in equity there. So there are some of those, and then time's not as much of a factor too. Like you could spend a year renovating that property and still not miss. But when you're trying to do volume and in order to do volume, you've got to take out a lot of leverage from a lot of different banks and you have to have a lot of people on your payroll for labor and turning these projects quickly. You don't have time. You've got 90 days. I got to be in and out and I need to have it under contract and sold in 6 months, right? I mean, otherwise interest expense starts eating away at your property. So
yeah, that's true. That is true. Well, okay. Of course we're, talking about capital preservation and, making your wealth. But I wanted to kind of leave y'all with this quote. Of course you get rich by taking large amounts of risk with small amounts of money. But you stay rich by taking a large amount of money with a small amount of risk. And so would you say that that's true now that you have kind of gone through your portfolio and you're kind of at the 400 plus store mark?
So what, say the quote again?
So you get rich by taking large amounts of risk with small amounts of money, but you stay rich by taking a large amount of money with a small amount of risk.
Depends on how rich you want to get. I mean, really. And I think there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've learned a lot about that over the last couple of years too, of like, one, yes, to get rich, right? Or to put yourself in a position to hit your financial goals, whatever they might be. You have to take a risk mainly with your time and with your talent.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't, unless you have a trust fund or, a rich benefactor or rich parents or whatever, mainly you're not like, when you're 25 years old, you don't have a stacked bank account, right? Yeah. So what resources do you have to offer? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I did not live like a regular life. When my sisters were like, studying abroad and traveling around the world, I was working 60, 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
When my friends were going out to the bars every night and going, I grew up in Las Vegas. So, there's always something that is trying to pull at you to like, come out, nightlife, this party, this concert, whatever. I skipped a lot of that.
Wow. Yeah.
I didn't travel the world until I sold my first company. Like I literally put my head down and was like, this is it. I didn't come from a wealthy family. I didn't get anything handed to me. And I was like, I have to exchange my time and my talent for the money that I want to make. So that's number one.
I like it.
But then you get rich. Okay. And that doesn't make you wealthy.
Yeah.
That just means you have a lot of more problems to solve. One, you're dealing with the government, right? Then you start buying, luxury items. You buy a house, you buy a car, you pay for first class instead of coach, right? So then your debt or your living lifestyle goes up, right? You're not any more wealthy. You're just living a more comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah.
Okay. So what separates anybody from being rich to being wealthy? And it's the other part of that question of like, I don't think I'll ever stop taking risks. I think I take more calculated risks now than I ever have over longer time horizons, but I still take risks every day.
Yeah.
I think that I've just, done it for so long that it doesn't feel like as much of a risk.
Yeah. How much you can stomach. Yeah.
But even if you have a really like low risk tolerance as a profile, real estate's the easiest place to be, really, because you don't have to take the risk of flipping homes or going to foreclosure sales and auctions and stuff like that. Like you can literally work, for 40 years at a W-2 job, max out your 401k, buy one property a year that you put a tenant in place that pays down your mortgage, virtually no risk, right? Outside of like natural disasters, you have insurance that covers, 99% of that.
Yeah. Well, even if it burns down, you still have the land.
Right.
So, and you just build another one, so it's definitely more tangible, more of a risk that you're investing in rather than the stock market.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
But I think that's like that's the thing I had to learn. And I didn't learn that until, my early 30s. So, 7 years ago, where I'm like, man, I'm making a lot of money, but I don't really, I had money in the bank. I had, a 401k that's being built up. I had a nice car. I had a nice house. Right. But I didn't really have wealth. And so I had to change my mindset and put that exact same like 25-year-old concept of myself to work of like, this is my obsession for the next 7 years. And like in that timeline, I've built, $15 million worth of net worth in real estate, maybe more depending on, who's appraising my property. And so I did that in 7 years. I don't think I'm the smartest person alive.
Yeah.
I just think I was obsessed with trying to like do that.
Yeah.
And
I can see that for sure. I mean, definitely you're here all hours of the day. I mean, you're committed to what you're doing and helping people. And so it's really inspiring to watch. For sure. I think that it's great. You're putting out, inspiration for everybody that's looking to start. So I think that that's where I wanted to start back with on, you said you were W-2'd whenever you did your first investment property. So do you remember what loan you did on your first door that you invested in?
Yeah. So was I W-2? I need to think back on that. I think I was W-2. Can't remember. This is like 18 years ago now, right? 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure I was W-2. But the majority of my income was coming from commissions. Mm-hmm. So I got like a W-2 wage, and then I'd get like monthly and quarterly bonuses. I was raising money on Wall Street at the time for a privately held fund. And so based off how much money that I would raise from our investors and how well those investments did, I'd get paid a bonus for that, right?
Yeah.
I think I made like $60,000 a year W-2. So at the time, that was enough for me to buy a house using my W-2, right? Yeah. Typically, if you're 1099 or you have a lot of commission, you need to build 2 years of like consistent reoccurring revenue for that, mm-hmm. right? Before they qualify your W-2 plus all of your commission, especially if it's like a new industry that you're in.
Right.
So I went from like literally being a small business and like loan officer at a private bank mm-hmm. that was all W-2. And I made like, I don't know, probably $120,000 a year to going half that in my W-2 with unproven commission track records yet, right? Because you have to get 2 years into that. So I could only qualify based off of my $60,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So I took what's called a DSCR loan, which is great for investors, great for self-employed people, high net worth people, people that own a lot of real estate currently. You can only have 10 total conventional loans like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac in your personal name. And so once you max that out, you have to go DSCR, commercial or whatever. Mm-hmm. So DSCR is only like 0.5% different than a conventional loan and much less underwriting requirements. So it's based off of how much cash you have in the bank, your credit score, and your history and home ownership or owning real estate before. So that's what I did. I don't think I've ever bought any investment property using a conventional loan. It's all been commercial or like portfolio or DSCR loans.
Wow. That's interesting to me because a lot of people, will house hack, they'll do a conventional loan. So that was a really important question that I had for you. I was just going to see how you did your first loan. So I think that that's awesome. So if anybody's looking to do a DSCR, definitely hit up Addison so he can, walk you through the steps of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think house hacking is great, but you can only do that once.
Yeah. Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this already, but I wanted to ask, how did you decide that investing in real estate was the right vehicle of investing for you? Was it because it was asset-based and it was tangible, or kind of talk to us more about that?
Oh, man. These are really difficult questions.
I'm going back in time.
I think it's a combination. Like, if I'm being completely honest, I think it's a combination of like real estate's something that's really easy for me to comprehend. Mm-hmm. You can see the property, you can touch the property. Everyone's lived in a house or a property before.
Yeah.
The stock market, you literally have no advantage at all. Like, you can make money in the stock market, you can lose money in the stock market. And there's traders out there that think that they have a market advantage. Mm-hmm. You do not at all. There are systems and algorithms and companies that literally trade money in microseconds, trillions of times a day, that manipulate markets one way or the other. You are just lucky enough to be on a wave that's taking your portfolio a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But you have no real market advantage. Everyone likes to think that like, oh, I bought Nvidia at this point or Facebook at this point or blah, blah. Okay, great. There, for every story that has, there's like millions of other people that have lost money on the other side of that transaction or bought the wrong stock and lost money, blah, blah. Right? Yeah. So I never wanted to take that risk. I never thought I had an advantage in the stock market. I always felt like, you know, my grandfather was an accountant for a company out of Germany for like 50 years. He never owned stock. And I always asked him why. He's like, I can't touch it. I don't know who's on the other side of that. You know, like, I know that's very short-sighted, but to like a little kid, I was like, oh, like real estate makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
And then when you add in all of the tax benefits that come with it, the fact that land is a limited resource, I just feel really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
You know,
no, I agree with that. Yeah. No, I agree with that for sure.
And there's people that like don't own any real estate and just own stocks, and they've done very well. I'm not trying to like take away from that or anything like, you know, my dad has worked, you know, I don't know, 45 years in the professional world, put all of his money in his 401k, bought stocks, and, you know, has made a very good retirement for himself, just like, you know, riding that wave.
Yeah.
Never owned any rental property, never developed any property, anything like that. He's going to retire very comfortably.
Yeah.
So you can do that too. I just never looked at it like, I'm kind of a control freak. I can't control anything in the stock market.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have zero advantage. I feel like I have a huge advantage in real estate.
Absolutely. So whenever we touch on those advantages, you know, there are, you know, whenever we're talking about controlling the risk for our assets, you know, there are controllable variables and there are uncontrollable variables. So whenever we're talking about a controllable variable, you know, we talked about this in episode 1 where you have, you know, your sales price, how that can be kind of a controllable advantage. But touch more on that. You know, is the sales price, you know, the research on the area that you're investing in, you know, population growth, school districts, unemployment rates, do those really truly help whenever you are going through, you know, your underwriting process on an investment property?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that real estate has zero risk, but the way that we like look at a market in general before we even buy a single piece of dirt or piece of property or anything, I feel like we do an amazing job of getting in the way of any losses before we spend our first dollar.
I like that.
And just from like a very, absolutely price is important. But prices vary wildly per market, right? So like in Lubbock, for instance, I can buy, you know, land to develop at $25,000 to $40,000 an acre. That's insanely low, but you have to take in consideration like what your end sales price is going to be, right? How much is it going to cost me to develop those lots? And then what am I maxing out my price at when I'm selling it? Whereas if I go to Las Vegas, 1 acre of residential land is between $750,000 and $1 million.
Yeah.
But I'm selling a $12 million house, right? So price is just like, it's a location situation, right?
Yeah.
Like what are you willing to pay in that market?
Yeah.
The things that I do not negotiate on is like, I want to see that the state politically is run in a way that is attracting business. It's reinvesting its tax dollars back into the state instead of running on these like massive deficits or, you know, having trouble with, let's say, homelessness or educating their population, things like that. I don't like that. Those are signs to me of deterioration, and I would prefer not to spend my money there.
Yeah.
So from the state level, then you look at the local level. I love college towns because again, you're educating your local workforce. Most of the time that leads to population growth because the more people you can educate, the more business you can draw to your community, the more of those graduates end up staying, and they're some of the highest income earners in the economy.
Yeah.
Right. Then I want to see the state spending money on infrastructure, so roads, schools, which very simply, I'll give you like an amazing calculation you can do right now. Schools equal rooftops. Rooftops equal commercial expansion. Now you have a complete community, right? I build a brand new school. There's going to be thousands of rooftops built around that school. Well, where are they going to shop? Where are they going to do their laundry? Where are they going to get gas? Where are they going to, blah, blah. So just looking at that, you cannot go wrong.
Yeah.
If you just looked at increase in population, net positive. Wage growth, net positive. Investing in schools, what happens after schools are put into place? Rooftops, what happens after rooftops are put into place? Commercial corridors.
That's awesome. Okay. So we kind of touched on the controllable things that we can control, but what are some uncontrollable things that you foresee whenever you're going to invest in a property? So think back to pandemic time. What are those black swan events that could come up?
Well, I mean, on my side of things, a lot, because we're buying dirt, right? And there's a lot of uncontrollables when you have raw land.
Very true.
The way to get in the way of that is just have really good engineers and have an open form of communication with the planning department. So, before we buy land, we go sit down with the local municipality. Hey, here's our plan. What kind of water, sewer, electric do we need? Roadways. There's a lot of other factors that go into that too. We could do a whole podcast on land development, but that helps get in the way of that. Soil testing, making sure, there's nothing toxic in the ground. And then knowing how much of that land that you can actually turn into residential lots, because a lot of it, if it's in a floodplain or you need a retention pond or whatever, you're going to lose some of those lots, and then making sure that sticks with your number, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm buying new construction, a lot of those, like if I'm just an investor, I'm buying a property from a builder, a lot of those variables are already done because it's gone through the permitting, a bank's done a loan on it, insurance has already written a policy on it. So a lot of those like risk factors are taken out, those variables are taken out. And what it really comes down to is like the reputation of the builder and their craftsmanship.
Yeah.
What kind of warranty do they have? Because like last thing you want to do is buy a new construction home. The builder's not going to help you if the roof has a problem or plumbing or electric. And so those are big variables, especially when you put tenants in place. They bust a valve or, stick something in a light socket or, whatever.
Those pesky kids.
Yeah. Insurance. But insurance is like, that's a great variable. It's like, they have a renter's insurance policy, require them to do that. You have a landlord policy and your insurance company will cover most of those things. There's not a lot that can go wrong outside of natural disaster.
Yeah.
Then you're in good shape.
No, I like that. And you always think about new construction as more of a controlled, investment. So I think that we've already touched on that. So that was really good. Totally. So I always say just educate yourself on policy and then practice, is actually in that policy. So make sure that you're always researching the market, you're vetting any operators that you're putting in place for that.
But I think part of your question too is like black swan events in real estate, right? I mean, okay, so like take 2004 to 2008, market crashes, real estate values get chopped in, half, maybe in some markets, even more than half.
Yeah.
But how long was it until all those prices came back? I mean, it was like maybe a one real estate cycle, which is typically like 7 to 8 years. That's nothing.
Yeah.
So part of me, like some of those unforeseen things, like, Henry Paulson could have bailed out Lehman Brothers. He could have taken them over and sold them off. He chose not to do that. That caused literally a run on the banks. That's a black swan event. It could have been avoided. They made some mistakes. I'm sure Henry Paulson's a great guy, but I think he made a huge mistake putting Lehman Brothers out of business because it caused fear. It caused mass sell-offs. It caused everyone to call their loans due. I think that's a lesson that the economy's learned from. I don't see that happening again.
Mm-hmm.
But like other unforeseen events, like take right now, like all the wars that are going on across the globe.
Yeah.
One thing people don't think about, everyone's like sitting around like, when's the Fed going to lower interest rates?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that is interesting, but not the entire story. Like when interest rates come down and you have to build more, right? Because now more buyers are in the market. You have all of these supply chain restraints across the globe where you can't get industrial and commercial goods from those countries like Ukraine, Russia, China, where even if you, and then going through the Middle East, a lot of those canals are now like war zones and it's hard to get ships through there, right?
Yeah.
So the cost of those things, one, they're going to make less of it, right? Just because they're using industrial resources to fuel a war.
Mm-hmm.
But two, even if you're going to get it over here, it's going to take twice as long and it's going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I look at as a builder of like, okay, well, how can I get enough goods and services to fulfill my project, and in what time frame can I get that done? Those are the bigger risks, right?
I like that,
and I think that's a risk to an investor too. Like if you're going to wait to buy until interest rates flatten out, by that time it's too late. You're going to miss the boat.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I was thinking. What if interest rates do the opposite and they actually go up instead of go down? How are we going to navigate that? We're going to adjust our plan and try to stick to the plan as much as we can, and still try to reach those goals. But, there are going to be some variables in there that you do have to adjust. And that's just part of the market and the wave that you have to ride.
Totally. And I think interest rates, like people get caught up on that too. Like,
mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the questions that you sent me on there too, is like, what happens if interest rates go up? Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, real estate and investing in general is all about time and distance, the timing in which you buy the asset and the distance in which you hold it,
mm-hmm.
right? So what other factors are in the marketplace besides interest rate? Well,
mm-hmm.
how much I can charge for rent.
Yeah.
What about property taxes? What about insurance rates,
mm-hmm.
right? So many different variables can affect when you buy and why. It's not just the interest rate. I mean, the interest rate could be 8% and you could still find deals. And more than likely, you're going to have some builders that are over leveraged,
mm-hmm.
that, are having trouble carrying all the inventory because they're trying to sell all that off. 8% interest rate slows down the sales market. Well, okay, instead of looking for deals on the open market, why am I not just calling other builders and saying like, hey, I'll pay you cost just to get you out of the way of the bank,
mm-hmm.
and you don't have to write checks to them anymore. Like you can start your next project or whatever, right? So there's opportunity in all of those things. I don't see the interest rate. Yes, it can be a problem, but it's one of like many, many factors that you should consider.
No, I agree with that. I do. So, now kind of switching gears, we touched base on this in the first episode that we did together. But I kind of wanted to ask you, how are you doing? You kind of touched on this too, like demand versus supply, so you're always kind of putting that factor into anything that you're going to invest in, looking at general occupancy trends, new developments in the area, stuff like that. So I think that I wanted to kind of switch gears and just see how you're kind of navigating, make ready and vacancy costs, because, you've gotten into the investment, you're holding out the asset for a long-term hold,
mm-hmm.
So how are you keeping that tenant in place? How are you making sure that you're going above and beyond because you don't want to face that vacancy?
I mean, that's really a good question for you because you can help us out with a lot of that. But I would say the most expensive thing that will happen to you in owning real estate for rent is a vacancy.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to do everything that you can to keep your current tenant happy.
Yeah.
And we talked about that a little bit last time about like how quickly do you respond to work orders or just answer general questions. And then providing other community benefits to them.
mm-hmm.
Do you get a discount to go, shop at this place, like because of the volume that we own property in,
Mm-hmm.
typically you can negotiate some pretty good like renter discounts for people.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I mean, when a vacancy takes place, I think that goes back to the finishes that you put in your properties. Like, we're not design experts,
Mm-hmm.
but like every piece of finish that we have in our property is available on hand, or I can source it very quickly.
Yes.
Right. So it's cheap for me to replace flooring. It's cheap for me to replace the drywall or lighting, because we're not choosing some, one of 100 pieces.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this stuff's everywhere. It's cheap to replace. It holds up really well.
Mm-hmm.
Just things like that when you're going into it. I like 1-story houses instead of 2. I like single family homes and duplexes versus multifamily because of the shared wall component. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to really like, and you keep your tenant longer.
Yeah.
In a single family home, because they truly, like, they have a yard for their dog to run around in, their kids can play. They'll set up a, play area in the back, and it's expensive as hell to move.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So use that to your advantage too. Like, make it an easier choice for your tenant to stay in your property rather than hire a mover, find another property, put down another deposit, and move.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're seeing on vacancies, really, whenever you're doing a make ready and you're facing that vacancy, you're looking at anywhere from about $5,000 to $10,000, up front. And that's with the make ready cost and the vacancy that you're facing. And so, I kind of thought about doing this and, doing everything that you just described, but we kind of call it a stacking method, which is we recognize the costs associated, with the vacancy. We also know that our staff that we have in place is actually going to have to put in some work to renew, that lease and keep them in place. So, we have incorporated a stacking method where, we send out the renewal at 60 days and we ask for, that notice of vacancy, mm-hmm. or, we can have, a stacking method where if they actually renew with us sooner, they get a different incentive. And so instead of increasing it, your rent, say, 2 to 3%, we maybe do it 1% because they're going to renew quicker. And so just always making that tenant happy, I think, is what's great. I want to always make sure that we're keeping that vacancy rate down, because $5,000 to $10,000, is pretty much all of the property owner's reserve, and absolutely. So it's hard to face a vacancy. So just really learning your resident, learning what's beneficial to the resident. You already have the new construction in place, so really just trying to keep that tenant in place is our number one priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as long as they look, I mean, I love being able to increase rents because that's just additional return to my portfolio. But mm-hmm. like, I'm not going to pick up pennies in front of a steamroller. Yeah. Like, the steamroller is a vacancy that costs $10,000, the mortgage payment that I'm going to have to pay when it's vacant. Mm-hmm. Right. If you get a 30-year fixed loan on a rental property, your carrying costs are somewhat fixed. I mean, property taxes can go up a little bit, insurance can go up a little bit, right? But like, as long as I'm covering my monthly debt expense and making a couple bucks, I'm not going to lose a tenant over a $25 or $50 a month rental increase. Yep. Like, that makes no sense. Yeah. Now, if I have, it's a really hot renters market right now, right? Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of renewals. I think last year on a couple properties I had, they were at $2,700 a month. Now, upon renewal, I can push those to like $2,850, and I have people that are already, looking to rent that property. Mm-hmm. So if the current tenant doesn't want to renew, I have to take that into consideration too. It's like, okay, well, I mean, what if I pay you? Mm-hmm. How about I give you a month of free rent to get out, leave the property in a really good condition, mm-hmm. and I'll give you your rent check back. Yep. And now I get to move somebody else in. So instead of spending $10,000 on a turnover, I spent, $2,700 in a rental incentive for them to leave my property in a good condition. And then I leased it the next month for $2,850 for 18 months. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, no brainer. I can do the math on that too.
Yeah, that's definitely no brainer. Well, that's good. I think that, we kind of talked about where you started, how you keep a tenant in place. What advice would you give to yourself, in your first rental property? Kind of think back then, and what advice would you give yourself today, looking back?
So me talking to my younger self,
yeah,
I would tell him to start building wealth sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, if I would have started on the path that I'm on now 5 years earlier, man, I don't even want to think about that. Because look, there is a trade-off of working really hard and enjoying your fruits of your labor, but I enjoyed them a lot. And I wish that if I would have started building actual wealth from a younger age, I think that would have been better. If my advice that I would give my younger self or anyone is do something now.
Yeah.
Have a plan now, whether it's saving money every month so you can buy your first investment property, or skipping one vacation so that you can avoid, running up your credit card bill so that you can buy your first investment property. Start on something now.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my number one advice.
No, I like that a lot. Yeah. And then I think my advice would be, just making sure that you never invest unless you're willing to kind of part with that money. Especially on your first investment, you always want to try to stay in the green, but there is risk that can happen. So I think that, just making sure that whenever you do go into that first investment, just kind of calling it okay, I'm not going to see this money ever again. And then if I do see some positive come from it, that's the ultimate win.
Yeah. I mean, I agree a little bit with that. I disagree with part of it in the sense of don't invest for the sake of investing and just being hey, that I lost that money. I get what you're saying, but there's also
Did I word it weirdly?
You know what I mean? But there's also a mentality of
yeah.
I'm just putting that to work. I'm not going to worry about it. No, you need to be an active participant in your investment, making
Absolutely.
sure that you're maximizing the return, making sure you're calling your property manager every month and checking in and seeing what's going on. Man, take, one of the best things ever. I think you told me this. I think you do this for your tenants, which are my tenants too, and other people's tenants. But man, take a minute during the holidays and write them a personal note.
Yes.
And send it to them with a gift card for $50 to, spend on a meal for their family, or to you at Target for home goods, or whatever, right? That goes such a long way. Be active in your investment.
Yeah.
Just because it's a passive income, people take that as an excuse to be lazy with it. No, it's passive because you're not actively managing the property or going out and doing the maintenance work for it, or, those kinds of things. But it's non-passive in the sense that you can play a role in your tenant's life to improve their situation. You're already providing a house over their head, which is one of the most beautiful things you can do for a person and their family, right? Make that experience worthwhile for them. If you're operating an Airbnb, make that experience something that people want to remember, and they're going to leave you a good review and put something, refer their friend to go stay at that house too. It's just be a little 1% goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all do the best that we can. We've made mistakes. All investors, all successful investors have lost money, but they've also, have been successful and made money. So it's just kind of riding that wave, like you've told me before, and just sticking with it. Make a plan. Even if the interest rates go up, stick to that plan. Continue to buy your 2 doors a year, or whatever you set forward for yourself. So I think that that's really important. It's just sticking to the goal.
Yep.
But this has been really great. That's kind of all the questions I have for you today. Yeah.
I love that. Well, this concludes our 2-part podcast with Hatti. I'm sure we will have her back. We'll answer some more of your questions. If you have any questions, post them in the comments. We're on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Where else? How do people find you?
All the things. So I have, of course, my Modern Day Living podcast, and then we're on YouTube. You can catch our for sales and our for leases on there as well. So yeah, follow me on all platforms.
Awesome. We'll post Hattie's contact information in the link below.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.